From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. One of the big global issues that challenges our optimism is climate change. The data around this subject, coupled by coverage of intense storms, wildfires, and droughts, can be overwhelming, to the point where we're left feeling helpless. My guest today experienced these feelings in a very intense way before deciding there was a different, more effective way of approaching this difficult subject, with a mindset she describes as climate optimism. And Therese Gennari is a TEDx speaker, author of the Climate Optimist Handbook, and the creator of the globally acclaimed podcast, Hey Change. For over a decade, she's been at the forefront of shifting the climate narrative from fear to courage. A recipient of the 2024 Net Zero Trailblazer Award, in addition to her book and podcast, Therese has shared her philosophy through extensive public speaking, explaining to her audience that climate optimism is not just a mindset, it is a practice of leadership. I hope you enjoy this blue sky conversation with Therese Gennari as much as I did. Therese Gennari, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Bill, thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on. I really enjoyed your book. I love your work. We're very like-minded, so this should be a lot of fun. I talk about optimism generally, and I have found that of the things that make people pessimistic, the big three that I always hear are political division and all that comes with that, the media, social media, and climate change is usually one of the top three. So I think it's very timely that you're on with me. And I know from reading your book, you weren't born a climate optimist, maybe not even an optimist, and in fact had this very impactful thing happen to you in your early 20s. Can you describe, it was sort of almost like your conversion to climate optimism?
Yes, and I should correct that just a little bit. I think I was probably born an optimist because I've always wanted to see things from the bright side and, love life. But I think that was to my detriment as I started to learn about climate change because I was in my early teens and this thing called global warming came to my attention. And I don't have to give you the whole backstory, but I didn't know how to deal with that. I was young. I thought there are older people with more power, they're going to do something about it. And when that didn't happen, given, at least I didn't learn about it in the newspapers and it felt like the world was heading in the wrong direction. I developed this sincere anxiety but I wanted to feel happy and motivated and good about the future. So I think my almost like toxic positivity or approach to it is what made it worse to start. I'll get back to that in a second. But to go back to the original of that story, I grew into this despair of the world. I felt very angry with people around me. I was angry with myself. I didn't feel good in my own privilege because here I was living in Sweden, having life at my fingertips and things were easy. And I knew there were so many people around the world that were struggling and animals were suffering. And then there was this thing called climate change. And so I became sort of like an angry activist, which I think a lot of people fall into, right? I was trying to force change upon people around me. I got, again, angry with those who didn't get it. It was always like, how can you not get it? Like, please be awoken, like wake up to the realization of things. And what you refer to is what I call my climate optimist awakening, when after a dinner conversation with my brother that literally turned into tears in my parents' guest room. And when I say tears, I fell to the floor and just surrendered. I've never cried like this ever in my life. And it was like the body releasing all this pain and anger that I had been building up and bottling up for so long. It just had to go. And I was sitting there, I literally could not move my arms. I was just, fixated in time and place. And after this session, a message came through and it was, you're here to be a climate optimist. Like, yes, this is your work. You have found your mission and your passion, but you've got to change your ways. Like, this is not working. You're not converting anyone. You're not sustaining yourself. And this is not going to be it. So that was my very starting point of my work as a climate optimist. And then what followed was, trying to do it the wrong way, which, when I talk about it now, is ignoring the negative facts, kind of like just tuning that out and only focusing on the positive news. And that's good. Like, we need to know the good things that are happening in the world. And that's a huge part of being an optimist. But when you don't tend to your own feelings, when you bypass yourself, when you don't do the inner work that actually builds resilience, it can actually kind of go in the opposite direction. And my climate anxiety intensified during those early years. And so that's my long way of saying the work I do today in Optimism, and specifically climate optimism, is helping people show up in that awareness, stay grounded in it, find a way to be aware of what's happening, even as news continue to feed us in negative outcomes, but also stay rooted in this radical optimism that the future is unwritten, right? Like, the future is literally written today. And so how we show up matters more than we can possibly even imagine. And that's why optimism for me is a practice. It's not a mindset. It's not an attitude. And it really stems from that first experience that I had, navigating the difficulties of climate awareness while trying to be an optimist.
Fantastic. So talk to me about, I'm sure, because I get this too, I'm sure you have people who even just hear the words climate and optimist together and think you're naive, you get your head in the sand, nothing's going to get done if we all just sit around and think things are going to get better. What's your response to that? Because I'm sure you've heard that.
Oh, I've heard this so many times. And when my book first came out, it was so interesting because just around that time, all these headlines started to circulate, and my book was sometimes in the cover. It was like, climate optimism is dangerous and irrational, and we can't afford this. And I'm like, great, I literally just wrote a handbook on how to do that.
Right.
So this is not the kind of news I need. But it kind of served me because it forced me to go deeper in explaining to people what climate optimism is, and more so what it isn't. And so when people say, we can't afford optimism in climate, it's like, okay, let's look at the neuroscience and the psychology here, and even reflect on why can't we be optimistic? Like, we are among the very few species that can think about the future, meaning something that hasn't happened yet, and have have an expectation of that future. Like, oh, I'm going to cook dinner tonight and it's probably going to be delicious. I'm hungry. Or I'm going to go to this party on Friday and I'll have a good time. Like, we can think about something that's in the future and have an expectation on how that future is going to be. Now, there is something interesting called the optimism bias, which shows that about 80% of us are optimistically biased, meaning we think that the future is going to be better than it actually turns out to be. So that's interesting to reflect on. But maybe it tells us that we need to be optimistic to try in the first place, keep showing up when things get hard, and to even have any chance of success. And so if you look at the studies that have been done around optimism, optimistic people are healthier, happier, live longer lives. And who can we benefit from being healthier and happier and live longer lives? People who care about the planet. And also, we are more successful. People are 40% more likely to get a promotion if they're optimistic versus their pessimistic counterparts. And it kind of makes sense, because if you think that, I think there's a chance I'll get this right, or I think if we try this, maybe we'll find another outcome, or whatever it is that you tell yourself, if you go into it with a positive mindset, of course, you're going to show up completely differently, right? Like, you will try, you will look for opportunities, you'll talk to new people, you'll explore new narratives and new opportunities. And that in itself is how we pave the path towards a better future. And so when people come to me and say, we cannot afford optimism, I'm like, we cannot afford not to be it. Like if optimism is not on the table, like, we can already say, that's it, it's game over. So yeah, I will always be a spokesperson for optimism.
I love it. So I had Chris Anderson on my show, who was the curator of TED Talks for years, and he told a story. It was Craig Venter, who was a scientist, an award-winning scientist who helped find the genome sequence. And I guess he was in a Q&A, it might have been around TED, and he was asked, who's right about the future and all this stuff? Is it the optimists or the pessimists? And he said, I don't know. He said, but from my experience, it's the optimists who get things done. And Therese Gennari describes her younger self as an upbeat and optimistic girl. But after years of being what she calls an angry activist, she had a breakdown. Agonizing over how best to respond to the challenge of climate change, she decided to approach it with optimism. Her form of optimism, she says, is a practice, not just an attitude. And a key component is reminding herself that our future is yet unwritten. There are people who hear about what you're doing or just read the headlines and say, no, if we want to do something about climate, we have to throw paint on artwork, and we have to, run onto sports fields with signs and that sort of thing. That's how we're going to get attention. That's how we're going to make things happen. How do you think your approach will make things happen in a better way than those more extreme headline grabbing activities?
Well, I understand it. I understand the anger, right? I understand where people are coming from. They want to grab people's attention. And sometimes I'm there with them in my thoughts. It's like, I just want to shake people. Like, let's wake up to what we're doing, right? Like, we can't keep sleepwalking. But again, it's shown that, we have been creating fear around climate change for decades. And, we've seen an increase in the media and people are more aware. The action doesn't necessarily follow. And it goes back to the psychology of like, the brain actually doesn't know what to do with that information. And if you think about it, like, I think I mentioned this story in my TED Talk, but if you approach a bear when you're out hiking, there's this big threat that suddenly appeared in front of you. What are you going to do? You're probably going to like slowly step backwards and run in a different direction. You're not going to approach it. You're not going to want to be like, how do we solve this bear problem? Like, no, let's just get out of here. And so when we hear things like, okay, climate change is coming, it's going to disrupt all of our lives, and our future might be, in danger, like all these things, it's like, how do I even conceptualize that today? And also, what am I supposed to do? There is no like, of course, we hear about like, you should be flying less, you should cut out your meat consumption and all these different things, and they all matter. But how we build up the case of climate change, and then there's not like the one answer of like run away, right? Like run away from it. We just don't know how, there's just no fit, there's no match. And so for me, when you come at it with a different narrative, because you can say that very similar things are almost the same thing, just with a new narrative. So to give you an example, instead of saying you should eat less meat because it's really bad for the Amazon rainforest, it's bad for climate change, it's bad for the poor cows that are treated ill. Instead say, you know what? You might benefit from trying some more plant-based foods. It could be fun to introduce some more plant-based options. Like, should we try this? Like, I found a new recipe. You're not saying that we need to cut out meat. Instead, you're inviting something else. But per automation, by introducing a new meal, you're cutting out the other one, right? And so I think just by approaching it in a different way to tell people, different ways are possible. Like, we can live differently here on Earth, and it might be even better than what we're used to. But the more we come at it with a shame, guilt, and blame angle, people are just going to put their hands up and say, I can't deal with this right now. I need to pay the bills. I have my kids' homework I have to tend to. Whatever it is, it's always going to take over because of this big cloud that we're building. It's going to feel too overwhelming, and we quite frankly don't know how to conceptualize or deal with it in the moment.
Fantastic. And there are a lot of reasons I enjoyed your book. And one was, I love quotations from people who are smarter than I am, and you used some great ones there. And there was one I hadn't seen before, and I'm not sure I'd heard of. Mary Heglar, I think it's pronounced. And this quote was, "The thing about climate change is that you can either be overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem or fall in love with the creativity of the solutions." I love that because one of the things I try to stress to people is just look at human history. Look at how we continue to innovate. Kevin Kelly says, last year's solutions become this year's problems. So the Industrial Revolution was an amazing thing. It pulled people out of poverty. It created a middle class. It employed people. It brought down cost of living. And guess what? The residue was, too much carbon in the atmosphere. And so now we're working on today's solutions for yesterday's solutions, that sort of thing. And I love this because it's inspiring to think about the creativity of solutions. And I'm wondering, are there certain creative solutions that you've been reading about or come upon that inspire you that more people should know about? Or gosh, if we just emphasize this a little more, it could really make a difference?
Something that really inspires me is innovation in materials. So anything from, how we build our houses, to coming up with, I don't even know if you want to call it concrete, but concrete that actually can hold livable things. So like you can grow moss on it. It somehow it kind of holds moisture in a way so things can grow on it. Even just materials that are so less energy intensive to create, but there are more insulating that are better for changing climates, like how we build houses, even just what they should look like. Should they be round instead of square? Like there's all this innovation of like, let's take it the next step and the next step. And also when we reimagine life in a house, it can even benefit our health, and not just physical health, but mental health. So stuff like that, we're like, okay, there's a yes and opponent to it. Like, okay, it's good for climate and it's good for us and it's more fun. And so that's one, like the building materials, even just what we wear. So like all these innovation in textile, how do we actually create products that are not, toxic and polluting both to the earth and to ourselves? How we wrap and package food is something I keep waiting for, because as when I was in my sort of angry activist days, it was very easy to sort of point the finger at other people, like, you're not trying hard enough, and there are sustainable products out there, you should seek them out and go the extra mile. And I really did that. I was the zero waste expert. And then I became a mom, and I now understand life, right? Like, I'm going to give my child a pouch because otherwise she's not going to eat her vegetables. And I had to grab something and get out the door. And so life has changed a lot. And so I have grace with myself in a different way. And I also think that like we should be able to walk to a store and buy products and just trust that they're good, right? Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, now I feel guilty that I bought this product that's packaged in something that's toxic and that's going to circulate the earth forever, right? Like there must be ways to package things differently. And people are coming up with, kelp-based solutions. They're coming up with different ways of creating plastic-like products. And if we just scale those innovations, imagine the world we'll live in. So those are just a few examples that make me excited. Even just getting better at repurposing food waste, right? Like getting part of like the cycle again, and finding a way that like, we don't have to be the parasite. We can actually live in symbiosis with Earth as was intended. And yes, we can do it while we're in our modern lives and society. I don't think there has to be a yes or either or. We're like, oh, we have to go back and live in caves again. I think we can continue to innovate and create even better houses. Maybe there are ways that we build houses in the future where like it's giving back to Earth just as much as, Earth is giving us, right? So yeah, I guess those are things that get me going. It's ways that people really think creatively about what's possible next.
Yeah, the house, everything you listed, we just think about it more than we used to, I think. So clothing and, people impulse buying clothes that they don't need, and they're made from fibers that use petroleum, and all these things are becoming, I think we're more conscious of. You mentioned housing. I lived in Maine for many years, and it's in the US, it's the most oil intensive state in the country in terms of oil heat for homes. And in the old days, coal and oil was cheap, and so you didn't have to insulate the house very efficiently. You just fired up more coal or burned more oil. Now we're figuring out that's not the right thing. And the changes you can make in the sustainability and the efficiency of a home is staggering. I mean, the progress in the last several years is absolutely amazing. There's a delicate balance to strike here. On the one hand, you can't just ignore climate change and hope for the best and do nothing. On the other hand, being alarmist can be counterproductive. I hadn't heard the bear analogy Therese offered here, and I like it. And I also think her reframing of commands like don't eat meat into more creative suggestions like try this delicious alternative is a wise way to look at things. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted to get Therese's thoughts on raising kids and how we should encourage them to approach climate change. You've mentioned your children a couple of times, but if you don't mind me asking, I'm curious to know, how has your view on all these, being a parent changes everything in a lot of ways. How has it changed your view on this issue, the importance of it, how we approach it? How do you raise a child being conscious of these things? Is that something you can share with us?
Yes, I love this question. Thank you. And something I reflected on not so long ago, it was actually when I was doing I was becoming an ambassador for the Inner Development Goals. I don't know if you've heard of them, but it's becoming a global sort of network of accompanying goals to the SDGs. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes. And so the IDGs are sort of complementary because they're all about the inner development that needs to happen to actually achieve the sustainable development goals. So anyways, I think those goals in themselves are extraordinary, and anyone who hasn't heard about them should look them up. But anyways, we were in session with one of those groups, and we were talking about now we've learned the importance of these goals and we have to implement them, but how do we find the time? How do we do this work? And so I started reflecting on myself and my life. My son is 1.5 years in a week. My daughter is 3.5. So I've been in the weeds for 3.5 years, and I'm full-time home with them. So, I work when there's naps and, the whole struggle. But what I'm trying to get to is that at first I was like, okay, I'm taking a break. Sure, I haven't taken a break since. I'm still working. I do my Substack. I do work when I can, but not at all in the same caliber that I used to because of my mom, first and foremost. And at first I thought, okay, I'm taking a step away to fully be in life as a mom. And then I reflected back on the past year and I realized, hang on a second. Actually, when I thought I was just doing life in quiet and nothing was happening, I was just kind of stalled in this moment, so much actually happened. And when I say that, I mean internally and how I now see myself in the world. And I know I'm talking around the topic a little bit, but what I'm trying to get to is that how I show up is so different than how I showed up just a few years ago. Yet the mission is stronger than ever and it's more aligned than ever. But I think we so often tend to overlook the sort of inner work that's necessary. We keep saying we need a better world, we need radical change, we need system change. We are the systems. We are the people who will unlock a different tomorrow. And I think that it comes from innovation. It comes from coming together in collaboration, being willing to ask big questions, being willing to pivot, even if we don't always know what the next step is, just continuously taking steps into the unknown. But for us to do that, we also have to become different people, right? We have to get comfortable with change. We have to get comfortable with things turning out differently than what we're used to. And until that courage is sort of planted and nurtured within us, where we start to accept and trust change and become willing to again, just explore different possibilities. Until that happens, I don't think we have the chance that we need, so to speak. And so I'm again talking around it, but what I'm trying to say is becoming a mom has been so radically transformative because I'm not the same person anymore. I literally am a new person today than I was 4 years ago. And that's wild to reflect on. And so it's a beautiful thing to be a mom. I know people are afraid of becoming parents, and I get it. I was for many, many years. But every day is such a gift, and every day is just another reminder that we have to keep showing up for this because they are the future. They're going to have the future we're handing off to them. And what I try to do, I mean, they're young still, but my daughter, the second she sees a tree, she runs up and hugs it. Already, I feel like I've done something right.
You've raised a tree hugger. A literal tree hugger.
A literal tree hugger. And my son would say, hi, tree. We're talking to them. They love nature. We live in a very nature's area. And I think that's the starting point. We tend to always want to educate children, but I think for them, it just comes natural. If they see and understand and respect nature, they're going to want to grow up and protect it. And so that's my biggest mission right now is just being fully present in life, learning from my kids as much as they're learning from me, and showing them a way of respecting nature that's going to benefit both them and obviously the future.
Fantastic. Well, and there's so much too, as you know, about being in nature, setting aside even climate change. It's really good for your mental health. I interviewed a man recently, Mark Berman, who's written a terrific book called Nature and the Mind. And you'd be interested in it if you haven't heard of it, if you ever had the time to check it out. So it's very good. Another thing too, I think it goes with parenting. I think it goes with any form of sort of even leadership in a workplace. It's my view, and I think most people would back this up who've researched it. You can lecture your kids all you want or your staff or whatever. They really key on your behavior. And so if you say, hey, stay off your phones, kids, you're on your phone too. Your kids are too young for that. But you're on all day, or, we got to stay positive. And then you get on and you're like, you carry it around. So what you model for your kids in this optimism or in love of nature or whatever, to me goes way beyond the lecture or the dinner table conversation. So I don't know if you've had enough years at this to reflect on that, but I have a sense that it's happening in your family, whether you know it or not.
100%. reflected on it just the other day because, I mean, climate aside, and it's all integrated, like anything we talk about is going to be about climate because we live in the climate and it's happening, right? So I think it all ties in more than we know. But even just modeling emotional stability, right? It's like, I read something where like trying to tell a child how to handle their emotions, it's not going to, register. They watch you though. So I think even to just like say out loud, mommy is a little frustrated, and I'm going to take a second to step away and like cool down. Or like, I was a little sad earlier, but I did this to make me feel better. I have a very emotional daughter. So that's why I'm saying this, like, she's just a range and it's amazing. It's so wonderful, but it's challenging, right? And it's challenging not to like fall into it yourself. But again, it ties back to my climate work because like, we're going to keep coming, up against challenges. Things are going to get hard. We're going to be even more frustrated with politicians. And so like, how do we remain optimists in this? And something I remind people, as I remind myself, is that you need to be your own source. That's why, again, the toxic positivity approach, where like, oh, but if I only read this many news headlines in a week of positive climate news, I'll be good. It's like, yes, that's important as your fuel. But it's similar to saying like, okay, I'm going to go pick a shirt in my closet and today I'm wearing red. Like, I want to be an optimist. If there is no red shirt in your closet, it's going to be very hard to wear one, right? So if we're always relying on outside sources, it is extremely hard to stay and remain an optimist, especially as times get hard. And so more than anything today, what I help with is, the practices of optimism in uncertain times. And I think back to our starting points, uncertain times is when we need optimism more than ever.
Yes. And I think too, with that uncertain times, humans have always lived in some level of uncertain times. And I think another bias we have is we all think that what we personally are going through, or our generation or this time, is so unique. And every time is unique in different ways. But just understanding that a lot of that's life, and life is uncertain. And how do we manage that? I think that's really important to an optimistic framework, because I have to tell people, yeah, I get bummed out. I doom scroll more than I should. I have moments where I'm like, but it's what do you come back to? What you're going back to your default setting, I think is the best you can do and is really important. When it comes to raising young children, I like Therese's approach of nurturing in them simply a love of nature. Burdening them with facts, figures, and doom when they're young won't likely be helpful, but developing an early respect for the natural world will make them want to protect it as they grow up. This all reminded me of a favorite essay I often quote by the writer David von Drell. He describes the importance of loving nature after he wrestles with his conscience after a beautiful cardinal outside his window reminds him of how climate change is threatening certain bird species. He concludes that he should appreciate this creature, and he writes, "One cannot usually address a threat to birds if they do not delight in individual birds. One cannot meaningfully answer the climate crisis if they lack excitement about the human capacity for invention and reinvention." Now, back to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Therese Gennari. You've written the Climate Optimist Handbook. You also have a podcast, and it looked like it was on hiatus for a while, but you're back. And it's not called The Climate Optimist. It's called Hey Change. So could you tell us about your show, what's it all about? Where's the name come from? All the above.
Yeah. So Hey Change was founded in 2017. I had to think about that for a second. So that's 9
early
years.
Podcasting.
It was. And it's funny because it's one of those things where I was like, I was living in New York. I was a young woman at the time, younger. And I kept having really incredible conversations with people. And I always thought, gosh, I wish I could capture this conversation so more people could hear it. Because it was in my early days of like wanting more people to get it. So I'm like, if they just heard this conversation, they'll understand what I'm getting at. So that's where I set myself on the mission to create a podcast. And it was funny. I gave myself 100 days. So it's one of those challenges to like learn what it looked like. How do I record a podcast? How do I edit it? And then I planned a whole launch party in Soho, actually, in this like salon, in back of their salon, and invited all my friends. And so I put the pressure on of like, you need to launch this show. It was fun. It was just like a at-home production for many years. I tried to quit it many times because, as you know, there's a lot of work that goes into podcasting, but kept getting reached out to by people who wanted to come on, and it was fun enough. And then when I got pregnant, I decided to take a break because of how time consuming it is. It came back last year because I was approached by a New York City production house, and they were like, believe in the message of this show. Would you want to come on as our show? And so that's why we came back in just a month ago or so in full production. So it's really exciting. And the reason it's not the Climate Optimist, well, first of all, it was founded before I took on that mission. But I wanted to keep the name because it is about change. And we sort of talked about this a little bit. And it doesn't have to be about climate. I don't want every conversation to be about climate. And I also want to reach a broader audience that wouldn't necessarily seek out the climate message, but not to be sneaky, but potentially sort of like bring them on to the message in a way that they feel invited and like they can connect with it. And I think there's so much to learn from our personal stories. So I love talking to people about like changes they've gone through, what they've learned about themselves, and then apply it to the bigger work. Because I think that's why we sometimes get stalled. It's like, how do we navigate this? And then we fail to recognize you probably have navigated very similar moments. You just didn't think about it because it was life, right? You said life is always uncertain, and we continue to sort of figure it out. And so I think we have a lot to learn from that we can apply to the bigger work, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's a show about change. What are changes that we don't want to just accept and sit back and watch happen? How can we get more curious about the good kind of change? How do we get better at nurturing that muscle that can show up for the uncertain times and get curious about it? And so, yeah, it kind of encompasses all of those things. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic. And so what is your schedule now? Are these weekly, monthly, more random, or how are you going to roll these out?
Bi-weekly right
yes.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Speed up a little bit in the future, but for now we're keeping it bi-weekly.
So in the time since you wrote Climate Optimist, has anything changed in your view? If you were going to write it again or write an addendum, or, things you've learned or people you've interviewed on Hate Change or being a mom, is anything you would change based on feedback you've had or ways, or as to just reflect on that, if you would?
Yeah. Well, so I wrote the book for like 10 years, and like, it's never going to be done. Like, rewrote it many times, and I finally was like, this book just has to come out. So I trust that the book is what it's supposed to be. I guess that's the first answer. And many times, you have those artist moments of like, gosh, how embarrassing that people are reading my book. And then I have people come out to me and say like, oh, I'm so inspired, and this, inspired me to do this and that. And so I'm like, it's doing something. Like, I know it's helping people. And I trust that, like, this book was downloaded to me many times on top of a mountaintop. And, I'm just a messenger in a way, in some regards. Of course, I would change things if I went back now. I would become, I think, a slightly better writer because I write a lot on my Substack. But all that aside, I think the book is what it is. I have created some like materials around it. So like discussion guides that people can like download for free on my website to like talk about it in a group setting. I also have developed since what I call the 3 narrative shifts, which I don't think I like outline very well in the book. And I'll just mention them real quick. The first big narrative shift is from responsibility to opportunity. So instead of kind of always going at it from like, what is my responsibility here, to say, what's my opportunity to participate? Like, if I wake up to the realization that like, we need change, and that's can be a good thing, what does my opportunity look like? And how do I best harness and nurture that? The second shift is from minimizing our negative footprint, which we're always so used to. Like, I need to minimize, cut down consumption, fly less. Again, that narrative of like, that's so heavy and really hard to take on for a lot of psychological reasons, to how do I actually maximize my positive impact? No one can minimize themselves to like the limit, right? Like, we all are just existing here on Earth. And so at some point we kind of give up on that mission. But instead, try to recognize, what are my skills? What fires me up? How do I want to matter? How can I make an impact that outgrows my negative impact? I think if we make that shift, it's a whole different narrative to show up in. And then the last one is, instead of thinking that we have so many more years to save the world and we're the last generation to do this and yada, 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 maybe we're the first generation to build a completely new world. And maybe that's what's happening right now. Like, we're building something so different, we can't even see it yet. And that's the excitement and the curiosity that we have to keep showing up in. So that's not part of the book, but I speak about it a lot, and people can access different resources, again, free on my website to kind of work through those. And the last thing I'll say is that I have a whole lot of other book I want to write, which is not going to be so much about climate. It's more about like, what is the unimaginable future we want to start showing up for, and how does it look like to navigate that path?
So you're not going to find time to start working on that for a while, it sounds like, but there's nothing wrong with having it percolating. And because, I worked on a book, and I think people, it's one of those things, it's much harder than people think to stare at that blank page in the morning or whenever you write. And it's just a lot. And like you said, and then you're done and it goes out in the world, and you've like put your child out in the world for people to take shots at. And it's a really unnerving thing. So letting it percolate for a while is not a bad idea.
No, with that said, if anyone's listening, I'm looking for a book deal. No, but
oh, there we go. Yeah,
I'm sure if he comes in, I'll find the time. It's all about prioritizing, but I'm with you. It's you have to have the routines of like, I do it. I was told once that like, you sit down the same time every day and you just start writing. And sometimes it takes a little bit to unlock, but you just got to do it.
William Faulkner is credited with saying, "I only write when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes at 9 every morning." That was his point. It's like, it's not going to strike. You gotta get there. So you mentioned a downloadable talking points and workshop conversation things. What is your website, and how can people find that?
Yeah, so my website is Therese Gennari, which is my name, .com, or theclimateoptimist.com. They lead you to the same page. So
perfect. And the podcast is Hey Change, and people can check that out wherever they get their podcasts, I assume.
Yeah.
Well, Therese Gennari, you've inspired me. I really enjoyed your book. I love the work you're doing. And I think the more the merrier in this optimism work. I believe it's really important for our physical and mental health, and it's going to be great for the world. And so anything I can do to keep spreading your word, I will do it. And I really appreciate your time. I know even more now how busy you are. So thanks for taking the time out.
I love to be here. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Here again, Therese offers ways to turn negative thoughts into more positive ones that will likely produce better outcomes. We can ask ourselves, what's my opportunity, as opposed to what's my responsibility? And instead of focusing just on reducing our negative impact, focusing also on maximizing our positive influence. And on a more grand scale, she suggests thinking of her generation not as the last one able to save the world, but the first generation to build something completely new and better. Amen to that. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Therese Gennari. Before you go, please consider leaving us a rating or review. These help us bring attention to the show, and your feedback gives us ideas for how we might make our presentations better. This and all episodes of Blue Sky are made possible by the skilled editing and mixing of the great crew at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about them, check out soundonsoundoff.com. And Crush Graphics is responsible for all graphics and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute. That's Crush with a K, and you can find them at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.